Coming up on Primetime Lawmakers, a bill to keep sex offenders from driving school buses and other commercial vehicles passes the Georgia House. Legislation about making life choices is considered today as measures prohibiting abortions after 20 weeks of making assisted suicide a felony are considered by the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. A bill expanding reporting requirements for witnesses of child abuse passes the Senate Judiciary Committee. Governor Nathan Deal's legislative agenda, from education to tax policy, is the topic of our on-set discussion tonight. I'll be joined here by Brian Robinson, the governor's Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications. An in-depth analysis of Capitol News in our Reporter Roundtable. Tonight we welcome Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report and Walter Jones of Morris News Service. It's political commentary you don't want to miss. For Monday, February 27, 2012, the 26th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly, this is Primetime Lawmakers. Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Let's go live to the Capitol where Sandra Parrish is there. A bill dealing with sex offenders and bus drivers passed the House today, Sandra.
Scott, the measure by Representative Paul Battles prohibits anyone who is a registered sex offender from getting a commercial driver's license to drive a school bus.
If there is someone that has been convicted of a sexual crime, they can apply for and they can receive a CDL license and be able to drive these buses until today. And this bill, House Bill 215, corrects that. This bill would prohibit convicted sex offenders who are on the state sexual offenders register from obtaining commercial driver's license with a designation of P and S. And P stands for passenger vehicles greater than 15 passengers, and S would be, of course, for school bus drivers.
The bill passed 157-4 and now goes to the Senate. It was a busy day for the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, which passed a bill with greater limits on late-term abortions. The measure by Representative Doug McKillop would reduce from 26 to 20 weeks the amount of time a woman can get an abortion.
We have got to do something to put a stop to the barbaric practice of late-term abortions. We're still talking about 140 days of choice, but at the point at which a fetus can experience pain and is just a baby. I mean, if I showed you a picture of a 20-week fetus, you'd say that's just a baby. We need to go ahead and step in, and the state can identify and articulate its compelling interest that overcomes the woman's right to privacy at that point. You're dealing with two people, not one person.
The measure passed on a vote of 8-3 with all the Democrats voting against it.
The major objections are twofold. One, it requires a woman to carry to term a medically futile pregnancy. Even if every doctor tells her that this baby will not come to full term and will not survive delivery, this woman will be forced to carry this child, this fetus in her womb. Secondly, it actually condones fetal torture. There are chromosomal anomalies that are identified at the 20th week, and assuming that fetal pain is indeed felt at the 24th or 29th week, which is what medical science says, that fetal pain will be felt by this child in utero until such time as delivery, when they will actually cease to exist. And so we're going to torment a fetus for weeks on end simply to torture women and to try to stop them from having abortions.
All of the issues that she discussed, the anomalies, the chromosomal anomalies, can be determined at 16 weeks the way we calculate weeks, leaving ample time even if you're dealing with 20 weeks. And so in those situations where the test is indicated, that's what would occur.
The committee also heard testimony today on a bill to ban assisted suicides in Georgia. Representative Ed Setzler sponsored the measure after the state Supreme Court struck down Georgia's 1994 law based on a violation of free speech rights.
The bill simply addresses the issue of individuals who have actual knowledge that a person intends to commit suicide, who then willingly and knowingly assist such person in the commission of that suicide. She'll be guilty of a felony, punishable by 1 to 10 years in prison.
The committee heard from Susan Selmer, whose husband John used Georgia-based group Final Exit Network to help take his life in 2008.
Well, John may have been desperate and depressed, and he had been for over a year on morphine patches, oxycodone, and on and off of Chantix. How can anyone with any kind of real judgment determine that a person under those circumstances, and only days post-op, be in a position to make that decision. How one thinks that putting a bag over your head and tying it tight and putting a helium tube and sucking on helium until you die is dignified. And why are we allowing people to say that that is more dignified than going through a normal natural death process?
No vote was taken on the assisted suicide bill today, but the committee is expected to do so tomorrow. A bill defining what a vicious dog is passes out of a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Non-Civil Committee this morning. Representative Gene Maddox, a former veterinarian, tells me he sponsored the bill after a little girl in his district was nearly decapitated in an attack by 3 pit bulls.
A dangerous dog is going to be classified as a dog that attacks and kills livestock and domestic animals, and they will also bite a person by causing a puncture through the skin but not a serious injury. A vicious dog will be identified as a dog that attacks and bites a person, causing serious injury. This means tearing the flesh, breaking the bones, causing nerve damage, possibly amputations, even death. All right, that's the main deal on it, and of course then we're saying that if a dog is a vicious dog, the local authority can have the hearing and they can decide if it's serious enough to authorize euthanasia on the first bite. If they allow you to keep it, it's got to be kept under strict restrictions and so forth in an enclosed pen that's escape-proof and also not accessible to young children. And then the last thing is that if it gets out the second time, then it must be euthanized.
That bill now heads to the full committee. Another bill passed out of the same committee last week that would charge an owner of a vicious dog with a felony if it breaks out and attacks someone. Scott?
All right, thank you very much, Sandra. After all the fireworks last week, not many people came to the Senate Regulated Industries Committee in support of a bill today regulating energy use in homes. Meter readers regulate how much energy is used in a home, and in the past, they've been analog, meaning that your energy use was being read manually. Well, now it'll be digital, and all of your energy information will be sent through a wireless signal to your power provider. The law in Georgia is that these new meters, now called smart meters, will be installed by the Public Service Commission. What had many citizens concerned today was wording that would allow a person to opt out of the program, even though they are not allowed to opt in or vote on whether or not they want it installed. People in opposition to the bill believe that this new energy technology will cause health hazards because of radiation. If a person should choose to have a smart meter removed, there will be a small charge. Now, an amendment dealing with solar panels installed by private companies who would then sell power back to power companies was removed. The newly revised bill passed the Senate Regulated Industries Committee and now moves to Senate rules. Water wars in the Southeast have been going on for years as states look to meet future water supply needs. Today, the Senate Natural Resources and the Environment Committee submitted a do-pass recommendation on legislation that is meant to help provide for some of Georgia's future water supply. For years, there's been water collecting at a quarry that runs from Georgia to Tennessee. The bill, sponsored by Senator Jeff Mullis, would make that water available to Georgia. Again, the Tennessee River Basin bill passed committee and now moves to Senate rules. The state of Tennessee, of course, will likely have some input into this issue. And now we go back to the Capitol where Keosha Howard has the latest in a bill that seeks to protect children from abuse. Keosha.
Good evening, Scott. The Senate Judiciary Committee today passed the bill to expand reporting requirements for child abuse. Currently, there are 9 professions where where you are required to report child abuse or suspicion of such abuse, including social workers, school officials, and healthcare providers. Under this measure, all adults would have to report known cases of abuse or eyewitness accounts. The committee was concerned that citizens might not be able to discern between abuse and acceptable disciplinary action. The bill's sponsor, Senator Renee Unterman, says she thinks the bill clears up what constitutes child abuse.
We made the language more restrictive, saying cruel or excessive physical or mental pain to a child. It's not the child in Walmart who's getting a whipping. There was a case on television this past week of a grandmother in Alabama who was making a child be punished by running up and down a driveway to the point of exhaustion, and the child actually died from that exhaustion. So if you were a next door neighbor and you saw a child running up and down the driveway for 45 minutes and not having any water and could see a child was being exhausted, this would be fitting into the more restrictive language. DFACS will see an uptick in the number of people who do call in, but once the general population gets educated about what constitutes child abuse, it levels off. But it's always my opinion that it's better to err on the side of the child and prevent a child from being killed.
The bill passed unanimously and now goes to Senate rules. The Senate today grants final passage to a measure that changes eligibility requirements for the Assistant Adjutant General. The position currently requires 5 consecutive years of service in the National Guard. Under this measure, that requirement is removed. The change comes after Governor Nathan Deal appointed retired Lieutenant Colonel Joe Girard, an Army veteran who never served in the National Guard. Democrats argue that making this change politicizes the armed forces.
House Bill 800 updates the eligibility for the position of Assistant Adjutant General for the Georgia National Guard. Under the current language, we would need to change the language to remove the item that says not less than 5 years of continuous service in the Army National Guard. However, the Assistant Adjutant General would still be a federally recognized officer with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel or higher with great qualifications.
When we change the qualifications after the fact for someone apparently that is close to the governor, when we do that we are politicizing the National Guard. When we do that, we are trivializing an institution that is critical to this nation's defense. The National Guard should not be a political pawn. The National Guard ought to be sacrosanct from politics.
A party line vote of 32 to 15 sends that bill to the governor. Also passing the Senate today, legislation that would make it a crime to point a laser beam at a police officer. Senator John Crosby presents the bill.
This bill simply makes it a misdemeanor for anyone to point a laser device at a police officer while he's on duty if they know that he is acting as a police officer. And I think that you can see the reason for this is because when you point a laser at something, a police officer may not know but what there's a bullet right behind it. And this is the kind of little beam. I'm going to point to the knee of the senator from the 14th. And also makes it a misdemeanor to point one of these at the cockpit of an airplane or a helicopter.
Scott, the measure passes and now goes to the House.
Thanks very much, Keosha. Governor Nathan Deal laid out his legislative and spending priorities in the State of the State address on the second day of the session almost 2 months ago. You saw the speech live here on GPB. With only 14 legislative days remaining, you might be wondering about the progress of those initiatives. Joining me now to talk about Governor Deal's legislative package and its status is Brian Robinson, the governor's Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications. It's great to have you with us in Primetime Lawmakers. Thanks for taking time to come down.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here.
Okay, 14 days are left. There's a long list of things the governor wanted to do. How do you feel about the progress of what's been done so far and the time remaining?
I think we are in excellent shape for completing the governor's entire agenda that was laid out in that State of the State address that you mentioned. This week, we'll be looking at dropping the competitiveness initiative tax package, which will be removing the sales tax on energy used in manufacturing, which was a key element in how we attracted Caterpillar to Clark and Oconee counties, creating 1,400 jobs. Reforming our jobs tax credit so more small businesses, which is the jobs creating engine in our state, can claim that tax credit. And removing a sales tax on products used for building materials for projects of regional significance. And we think all of these are going to be very important in bringing jobs to Georgia, making us more economically competitive. The governor's #1 goal in everything we do, whether it's in taxes, whether it's in education or transportation, is making Georgia the #1 place in the nation to do business. That is our goal. That is our umbrella.
That's the filter.
And everything else falls under that.
Let's take a look. We got a full screen, I think, to show our folks at home some of those things you just mentioned in the competitive initiative. Since you brought it up, tax reform measures include, let's bring that up if we can, energy sales tax elimination, the jobs tax credit restructuring, and sales and use tax exemptions. Now, out of all those, it seems to me one of the toughest things to do would be one of the most expensive, and that's going to be the energy sales tax initiative, which would cost correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere between $100 and $150 million a year if you did away with it tomorrow. How do you phase that in, or do you do it all at once like brutal surgery?
Yeah. I think the actual number is going to be about $140 million, which isn't that much when you consider the payoff that we will get in the long term, when you consider that when you score this dynamically as opposed to statically, we're going to generate money from doing this. Again, let's go back to Caterpillar. That was an important element in how we got that company to come here, bringing 1,400 jobs and 2,400 jobs in the supply line. Mm-hmm. We're going to be getting tax income from all of those, and that's going to have dynamic tax consequences for the state's treasury. Now, we don't know exactly at this point in time how the legislature is going to chop it up. There will probably be some phase in. It could be 3 years. It could be 7 years. So it's not going to be $140 million out of the budget next year. Mm-hmm. But it's something we're going to do over time to make it affordable. And, we have seen over the last 4 years just a historic drop in tax revenue as the entire nation has suffered from recession. But we've had close to 18 straight months of revenue growth. I mean, things are getting better here in Georgia. And, the governor's deal wants to make sure that as times get better, that we're not going to keep feeding the beast, that we're not going to regrow government to where it was before. And he's taking proactive steps in this session and last session to keep the size of state government very small so that when the good times come back, and they will, that we are set to keep taxes low and, in fact, reduce the tax burden on Georgia's families so that we're not only a great place to do business, we're a great place to raise a family, a great place to live.
So no one argues the energy sales tax does put us at a disadvantage of other states. It does, having it in place now.
Absolutely.
So getting rid of it's going to help. So and what you're saying is that's going to happen a little bit over time. It's not going to happen all at once.
It's going to happen over time. We do have other advantages over other states, but
sure,
we want to make sure that we have every advantage over other states. The advantages that we have here go beyond tax policy. It's also our nationally renowned Hope Scholarship, which is still the richest scholarship in the nation. It's our quality of life, our low income taxes. There are many things, and this is just one more element. That's going to be one more hook to give our negotiators when they go and meet with these companies. We want to be able to lay out a package and convince them from word go that Georgia's the place where you need to be.
Like you guys did with Caterpillar. I say you guys, the governor and his team did,
like
obviously.
the governor did with Caterpillar, absolutely.
Let's move on to a different issue. Criminal justice reform. The governor talked about that. Chief Justice Hunstein's talked about it. It's finally in some language now in HB 1176. The recommendations were dropped today. Is this what the governor had in mind?
Well, the governor has put a lot of work into this over the last year. We last year started the Criminal Justice Reform Council, which came up with a set of recommendations. And what this is going to do is create alternative courts so that people whose underlying problem isn't that they're criminal, it's that they have a drug addiction, for example. What we have seen in the drug courts, and there are already some existing in Georgia, is that if we get people whose underlying issue is drug addiction out of the prison system and into a rehabilitation setting, that their chance of recidivism, of committing another crime, go down dramatically. The numbers are stark. If we put them in prison and they get out, 95% go back to a life of crime, or go back to using drugs at the very least. What we're looking is that for those who are reformable, nonviolent offenders, that we're going to give you a chance to get the help that you need. And that's what we're aiming for. The bill that dropped today is going to need some changes.
Does it save the kind of money the governor wants to save, for instance?
The bill today is not what is not where we want it to be. We feel really good about the House leadership and our ability to work with them to get the right package that's going to save taxpayers dollars. Okay. Because when we keep people out of prison, that is $18,000 per person that we save. We are spending more than $1 billion a year in incarceration cost. Now, that's 1/18 of our entire state budget. We are the 9th largest state in population, but we are the 4th largest state in prison population. That's not sustainable. When you commit a serious violent crime in Georgia, you're going to prison. We don't care what the reason is. If you hurt a Georgian, you're going to prison. But what these reforms do is make sure that we have the beds and we have the money to keep the serious offenders, the dangerous people, off the streets and behind bars.
We'll watch the work proceed on that. In the few seconds we have left, you feel good about the chances of getting the money the governor wants for his education initiatives, everything from medical residencies to pre-K funding.
This is another part of our competitiveness push. We've got to make sure that each kid in our state gets opportunities for excellence. And the other side of it is, when we graduate kids from high school, and we're also going to begin a really hard push with the Complete College Georgia plan to get them through a 4-year institution as well, or into a skilled labor through Go Build Georgia, that when we are out recruiting businesses or getting people to start businesses here, that we have the workforce in place that can do the work that is required. We need welders, but we need doctors too. We need engineers. We need all those things. And our education plan is about giving individuals a chance to succeed, but it's also about giving our state a chance to succeed, because we've got to have an educated and skilled workforce to attract those jobs in the future. We know that over the next 30 years, 60% of new jobs are going to require a college degree. We have got to do better. Now, only about 40% of Georgians have a college degree. We can do better, and we're going to do better.
We'll have to leave it there. Let's get you back for a progress report.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Great to see you, Brian. Thanks for coming down. We got to take a short break of Primetime Lawmakers, so don't go anywhere. Much more to come. We bring in two of the best political journalists in the state. When we come back, Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report, and Walter Jones of Morris News Service. We've got a lot to talk about. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. Time for our Reporter Roundtable. It's part of the show we tap our stable of the best political journalists in the state. Tonight I'm joined by two of the best, Tom Crawford, editor of the Georgia Report, and Walter Jones of Morris News Service. Gentlemen, it's always great to have you here. You all know what's happening down at the Gold Dome. Let's start with what Brian Robinson said just a moment ago. The governor's office thinks the criminal justice reform package is going to take a lot of work, Tom. Apparently it's not going to save the money they want to save, at least the way it is now.
Well, they're going to have to do some rewriting on it when they get it into committee, and they are bringing it in a little bit late in the session, so it'll be a challenge to get it through. It can be done, but it is going to take some work at the committee level, no question.
What are you hearing, Walter?
Well, it's a complicated bill because it involves a big part of the law. I mean, it's
Sure.
going to be long, it's going to be involved, which is going to involve plenty of people to comment on it, from sheriffs to prosecutors and certainly defense attorneys.
And does it include the idea of decriminalizing things like traffic offenses so they're no longer treated like misdemeanors, it's more of a civil action?
Right. It's basically the old thing. You issue a citation, you pay a fine, you be on your way, which is a way to get the courts unclogged, but on the other hand, you might wind up with some judges who don't have enough to do. So that's another issue that needs to be resolved here as they move forward.
Governor's competitiveness initiatives moving forward. Finally got that in some bill language. Any thoughts about that, Walter, where that's going?
Well, they've been very eager to do jobs-related type of legislation, and so I expect that that'll probably sail along pretty quickly. If anything, people will probably look for a chance to amend it, tack on some of their own goodies to it to sweeten it. But, you know, the governor has a big stick in that veto pen, and so we'll see how that comes out.
Tom, that's a big package.
It is a big package. And some of the things the governor wants to do, I think he's hampered right now that there's not a lot of money they can throw behind it. Go Build Georgia is a good example, which is a great idea, but again, we're not quite flush enough to where they can put a lot of money behind it, so it might be a little slow going at first, I think.
The idea of restricting abortions to 20 weeks in Georgia, a 20-week term, is beginning, at least getting some traction on the committee level. Where's that going?
I think it'll make it to the House floor for a vote. The last couple or three sessions, David Ralston, the House Speaker, has prevented a vote late in the session on those bills. He thought maybe they were a little bit too drastic for the state, but he has said publicly that this is one he might be able to let out for a vote. So we may have a House vote on the full House floor in a few days, and that'll get a lot of folks going.
And I think, frankly, part of the motivation is that the author of the bill, Doug McKillop, is facing a tough re-election. He switched parties in Athens, became a Republican, which is not a hotbed for Republicans. And I think there's a little bit of interest in trying to help him out.
And when we're looking at social engineering, as a lot of people call it, the idea of a sex offender registry connected to commercial driver's licenses. What do you
We're
make
talking about
of
the bill
that?
that passed today.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I guess it's hard to say that somebody on the sex registry should be driving school children in a bus. So it sailed right through. Tom and I were talking about how, isn't that common sense, though? I mean, who would hire them?
Yeah, you would think. Although it does grandfather in some folks who are already there.
Well, yeah, and it's as Walter said, that's one of those issues. If you vote no, even if you have a very good reason for voting no, they'll come back and haunt you later.
Are you hearing any chatter at all on when the charter schools amendment's going to come up in the Senate?
That's a hard one to read because they have got to somehow figure out a way to keep all the Republicans in line and pry off to Democrats as well. That's going to be a very hard thing to do, and when Chip Rogers was here last week, he acknowledged that's going to be a tough challenge for him. So,
you know, I asked him about the fact that in the House, the traditional leadership structure, they can influence some votes. They can twist a little bit of arms. They can promise things. The Senate is such a decentralized leadership model that he acknowledged to me that, yeah, we don't have anything except our own persuasiveness to make it happen.
And you've got that division in the Senate, too, between the lieutenant governor and some of the folks who want to be running the chamber instead of the lieutenant governor. So that makes it more difficult.
Of course, that kind of thing comes down very quickly when you start talking about things like the power of appointing people to conference committees and that sort of thing to deal with the budget. Do you see the little budget going to a conference committee, or is that going to be handled behind the scenes?
They may handle that behind the scenes because they try to avoid having to appoint a conference committee simply because that, once again, puts the lieutenant governor up against some of the other leadership there.
What do you make of them excising the solar power panel, private contractor solar power panel provision from the smart meter carrying legislation? Walter, there's a lot of noise about that last week.
Well, I think that's a big victory for the Southern Company and Georgia Power. They really have been fighting this. They've gotten their lobbyists out in full form.
Are we going anywhere with ethics reform, open records bill from the Attorney General?
I think that was a good sign that the open records bill, the open meetings bill came out of committee today. I think they can get a vote on that. As far as limiting lobbyist gifts, I still don't see that going anywhere, but they can probably do some good things with the Open Records Act there.
Yeah, in the 30 seconds we have left, Walter, you've been writing about the potential for a third port up the St. Mary's River that would negate having to dig out the Savannah Harbor.
Well, they're not saying it's an alternative to the Savannah Harbor. Okay. They're saying that Georgia already has a third seaport in the Navy base down there where the submarines are based in Kings Bay. So going 3 more miles up the river, there is an abandoned site that used to be a paper mill. So bring the ships in there.
So we'll follow that. That's an idea that may actually have some traction.
Correct.
Thanks, gentlemen. Good to see you as always. Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, committee vote is expected on assisted suicide. Governor Nathan Deal kicks off the complete College Georgia program, and the governor's open meetings legislation is expected on the Senate floor, plus all the latest news under the Gold Dome tomorrow night at 7. Any part of this broadcast, if you missed it, catch it tomorrow morning at 5:30 when it repeats. Coming up next on GPB, Georgia Traveler, the best of Season 5. David Zelski and the whole Traveler gang visit the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville, find first-class Southern cuisine in Atlanta, tour the Gibbs Gardens and Ball Ground, and much more. That's coming up next right here. See you tomorrow night at 7 on Primetime Lawmakers.
This is a GPB original production.